Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Wednesday, March 26th, 2025, and on Wednesdays we consider emotional well-being and relationships. Some of you may recall from last week's vlog or last Wednesday's vlog, the focus was on expending and protecting our energy, our most vital resource. And most important, as cultural beings beyond our biology, you have to choose where you're going to focus your attention and therefore your energy. But since most people struggle with the issue of focusing their attention, or at least to a certain degree or in certain respects, I assigned some homework. I challenged listeners to do one thing or establish one new habit or a 5-minute routine that they could do every day. That's it. Just for practice. It's a start. By way of analogy, you wouldn't think about running a marathon and then just go out and run 42 kilometers the next day or every day as your means of training. Instead, you'd start by walking maybe 1 or 2 kilometers or alternating walking with running, and then develop a training schedule that would allow yourself to gradually build up your strength and your stamina, as well as your confidence and your competence at running faster and farther. And the same logic applies to learning how to focus and direct your energy in more useful, effective, and creative ways. And there's a well-known expression that captures the core axiom at the heart of this process. That is, that energy flows where our attention goes. And so therein lies the key to our long-term emotional health and well-being as well. That is, the ability to focus in productive and creative ways the use of our energy. And I suggested, too, that there are 4 basic steps to harnessing our energy in just such a fashion. So now, according to the first law of thermodynamics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. That's the law of the conservation of energy. I suggested, too, that there are 4 basic steps to harnessing our energy in just such a fashion. So, again, what we need to do then is apply this logic to the same principles that underlie the use, the creation, and the production and use of energy anywhere and everywhere. So first, we have to identify those things that might be threatening the use of our energy. That is, that might, for example, keep us from fulfilling our potential and draining us of our physical, emotional, and mental energy. So on the physical side, of course, we have to assess our basic health, our physical selves. And what can we do to achieve optimal health? Now, that's going to differ to a certain degree based on our differing physiologies and our corporeal needs. You know, we have different shapes and structures and sizes and so forth to our bodies. But we all have to directly consider our diet, exercise, and sleep routines. Again, I'm not talking necessarily about counting calories and certainly not about running marathons. I'm talking about identifying those sources of nutrition that provide net benefits in terms of sustaining healthy functioning, cellular regeneration, and most importantly, then our ability to release energy for whatever purposes we desire. And that includes, by the way, hydration. Water is an absolutely vital resource. If we don't remain sufficiently hydrated, this, again, thwarts our optimum functioning and our health. And so, all of these things matter. The same logic extends to our exercise routines and our sleep patterns. These should be geared towards optimizing health to keep our energy levels high. Whatever routines you might establish, you have to include sufficient periods of rest, recovery, and rejuvenation. Now, to help monitor your energy and your flows, you can decide to keep a diary of what you're eating, how much you're exercising, how much you're sleeping. Just the basics in that regard. I know that's a huge ask, but if you're truly struggling with your basic energy reserves or your daily functioning, that's probably the best place to start. So, for example, in tracking my own biological functioning. I found that after achieving a better balance in my diet and eating healthier, I still had to reduce eating unhealthy snacks, which is sort of my default for when I'm under high levels of stress. So that's something I have to work consistently to try to change a pattern, if you will. And then as well, I found that while the exercise wasn't a problem, I was able to maintain healthy exercise routines. But in my case, I also determined that I suffered a significant sleep deficit. And so that's something that I'm still working on. Emotional and mental energies are further extensions of the same basic principles, but just in maybe a slightly different form, if you will. So we have to monitor that which contributes to our relative stores of emotional and mental energies, which are linked partly to our dietary decisions. In addition, emotional and mental energies are linked to our psychological and cognitive processing abilities. What's impeding our optimal functioning along these lines? So in that sense, we have to identify the sources of strength and those habits and those conditions and even those people who contribute to that strength, or conversely, who might be draining us of our energies in these regards. So again, we can't possibly identify a whole laundry list of all of the possible sources that might drain us of our emotional and mental energies, any more than we could identify every possible unhealthy foodstuff we should avoid. Instead, you can simply start by monitoring your emotional and mental responses to the broader conditions in your social environments. What do I mean by that? Well, if you find yourself, for example, unable to focus no matter what you try at your work or on your job, then there's a good chance that there's something fundamentally wrong or problematic about your job or about your workplace. So, the logical step would be to try to identify the specifics, that which affects your performance adversely at work, and then try to hone in on those and target those for change. Or if you find yourself regularly put off by someone in life, you'll need to evaluate what's wrong with that person or your relationships, or perhaps with yourself. In other words, if you walk away from an encounter or a conversation and you from somebody or particular situation, and you routinely find yourself distracted or upset or unable to focus in the aftermath, then you really need to determine, is that a one-off situation or is that a recurring problem? And if so, what can you do to address that problem? Okay, again, there's a lot more you could possibly unpack in this respect, but I hope you get the basic point, which is to identify that which perpetually or regularly drains you of your energy. So that's the first step. The second step then is to create an action plan to help us refocus our energy and break the unhealthy cycles. Now that's a challenge, especially because most of us are so habituated to the previous patterns, mentally, neurologically. In some senses, we are genuinely trapped in our minds and in our bodies. And so how do we break free? Well, there are many individual or specific strategies we can use, but the main one involves creating an action plan to develop greater control over yourself, your situation, and your thinking. That is, we can learn to self-consciously regulate how we process information and how we expend our energy. So here too, I want to emphasize that our action plans are going to vary tremendously depending on our own cultural backgrounds and the resources that are available to assist us with the process. There's no one or universal action plan, and so you have to consider your particular circumstances. For example, an action plan might include weekly counseling or therapy sessions to help you develop your ability to self-regulate or develop healthy sleep patterns or what have you. But you may have no insurance or simply the money to pay for regular weekly sessions. The worst decision, though, would be to simply give up because you're thinking, well, I just don't have the time or money. Instead, that's where you have to challenge yourself to be more resourceful or to think outside of the proverbial box. Maybe you could find a good YouTube channel or online sources as a substitute. Perhaps you have a friend or you know someone you can talk to about your problems, or someone who can help coach you or who can regularly support you in your journey. Or, again, while you cannot afford necessarily regular therapy, maybe you can afford to buy an excellent book or two, something that's highly recommended, maybe a whole system, if you will, and that'll help you to focus your energies accordingly. So, action plans, of course, are not simply about should I get therapy or counseling or not. Action plans might include figuring out how to change one's job, if that's at the core of what's something that you've been struggling with, or committing to starting a regular exercise routine of some kind, or joining a community group or a club. That might be the key change, or the part of the action plan that you hope to implement. So in each case, though, the crucial step involves identifying something or some area where you'd like to take action, and then identifying and following through with the resources that you'll need to be able to make that change. One thing, of course, is almost certain. If you do not identify that which drains you of your precious energy, and if you do not make some kind of an action plan, then you're almost certainly not going to change. You'll remain stuck where you've always been. And that, of course, leads to step 3. You have to develop then the habits to follow through with the action plan that will allow us to regularly put that plan into action. Sometimes it's the simplest of action plans and habits. So, for example, I used to have a real problem with locating my car keys. Mainly, I just leave them either in the pants that I was wearing or the coat that I was wearing the previous day. And then I'd have to try to think and remember where I left them or what I was wearing. And every time then I'd end up spending several minutes, well, not every time, but most of the time I'd end up wasting a lot of time trying to figure out exactly where I left the keys. And so at some point along the way, years ago now, I realized, well, that's silly. I identified the nature of the problem, and I realized just how much time and energy I was wasting looking for my keys on a daily basis. And so instead, I developed a new habit, a strategy. The solution was, of course, absurdly simple. That is to commit to placing them in the same place every day as soon as I arrived home. And that's basically been my habit ever since. No, I'm not perfect in that regard, and even with that simple routine, but I'm almost perfect on that one. I only struggle to find my keys literally maybe once or twice a year. All right, well, sure, Dr. J. Well, any monkey can learn how to put their keys in the same place. What about something more challenging, like remembering people's birthdays, or important events or activities? Or what about stuff we generally don't even like to do? How do we build healthy habits around those sorts of things? Well, again, there are many possible answers. So here are a couple of tips, again, that I think can apply to almost everyone, regardless of the challenge. We all have to, for example, wake from sleep. Right? Usually it's in the morning at some point, unless we're working a night shift. Most important, one suggestion would be to start each morning maybe 5 to 10 minutes earlier than what you're used to doing, and then establish a new routine to fill that 5 to 10 minutes. So in other words, if you've been waking up, let's just say, for example, at 6 a.m., you've been setting your alarm for years, at least for your regular work week or whatever, for 6 a.m., and you're used to getting up at 6 a.m. Well, you can self-consciously change that tomorrow. You can set the alarm for 5:50 a.m. and then commit to doing or using those first few minutes, that new time that you've carved out, to establish a new routine, to do something different than what you're used to doing. You can start with, for example, a daily prayer, or some kind of meditation, or writing down your dreams. That's often an interesting one to try. Or thinking about 3 things that you're grateful for. or getting up and doing a couple of sets of, sit-ups and push-ups or something along those lines. Literally, whatever you want that aligns with some broader purpose that you have in mind. So, and then something else that I found is helpful, or something else that I try to do, again, literally every day, perhaps upon waking, or maybe just in the context of doing my bathroom routine or having a shower, I think about what day of the week it is. Not just the day, is it Sunday or Monday or Tuesday, that sort of thing, but also what's the actual date of the day, okay? And in so doing, I'll often start to informally prioritize my day, right? Or at least remind myself of a couple of things that I absolutely don't want to forget, or that I think are important, things that I should really attend to on that particular day. Again, if you need electronic devices to remind yourself of your routines, to keep your schedule and so forth, whatever device works, that's great. No worries. It's just like, most of us need an alarm, or we set an alarm clock to remind ourselves of when we need to get up. And then we can use our technologies, of course, to remind ourselves of what else we need to attend to. But I'm suggesting something different, or something in addition to that. I'm suggesting that it's also a great idea to spend some time each morning, literally, just thinking about the day, thinking about your priorities and obligations, and then focusing more of your attention accordingly. So, for example, you can have a daily planner or a daily ping that reminds you to, do this or do that, or get to the gym at this time, and so on. Great. But you can also think about the day, spend a few minutes, as I say, typically in the morning, and as I say, maybe in the bathroom, and self-consciously think about what might actually be really important that you have to get to. And that might involve a trade-off. That might involve actually having to miss the gym on that particular day. Don't beat yourself over that, right? There's no point, because you've identified something that's absolutely critical that you want to attend to. So again, for myself, I actually try to go to the gym every single day, but I'm not a slave to that idea or that routine either. It's a habit, but it doesn't control me. I have control over that habit. If there are more pressing matters, I'll place those above the gym or the workout issue. And for me, the most important thing I'm involved with on a regular basis would be what I do for a living, or my teaching specifically, being in the classroom. And that's basically the one thing I try to never miss, and only rarely have over the last 38 years. So my point then is to develop the healthy habits that will allow you to direct your energies. But don't beat yourself up if you miss a day here or there, or if something comes up and you have to change the priorities. Again, that's partly why I do schedule the gym for every single day. And most days, that's fine. I get to the gym, 5, 6, and oftentimes 7 days in a week. But I allow myself, the buffer, so to speak. And I know that it's no big deal if I miss a day of going to the gym. Okay. And in fact, almost every week there is perhaps one day where going to the gym doesn't fit into my priorities. In fact, that's what happened today. But that's okay, because the routine has been established, and I'll always go back to the routine, right? And that's what you can do as well. And finally, we have to create then and recreate the conditions that will allow us to sustain these changes we're endeavoring to make. It's a lot like recycling, if I can use the analogy, right? So if we're going to recycle regularly, how do we create the conditions that are conducive to that support that habit that we'd like to have? Well, one of the things that we do, for example, would be to have bins to separate the papers and the plastics, or to separate as well the compost from the garbage. That's why we have that here in London, Ontario, the green bin program. And so each week, we then have separate bins for the paper, for the plastics, and the other kinds of recyclables, a separate bin still for the compost, or green bins, And then separate from that, garbage. And what we found, at least my wife and I, in our weekly routines, is we produce very little garbage. We're not quite down to zero garbage, but almost everything we do now ends up getting recycled or composted. And again, that's because we've created the conditions, we've gotten the bins, we've set up the system that allows us and reinforces us to do the recycling and the composting. And a natural extension of that has been that we produce almost no actual trash that goes into the waste recycling centers. So, but anyway, that's just us. You don't have to do that, but that's just an example of what I'm talking about, right? So in terms of directing our energy in productive and creative ways, the same basic principles apply. So ideally, create the home environments and the social environments that allow us to thrive. And again, let me explain this with a well-known negative example. Why do so many former inmates end up being repeat offenders or recidivists? Well, we know this from the research, but what the bottom line is that whatever help they may have received or may not have received while they were incarcerated, whatever changes they may have tried to make, most inmates ultimately do what? They have to go back to their old or the same environments from which they came. And you find yourself going back to live with the same kinds of people, in the same neighborhood, the same families, the same social connections, and so on. You're going to be subject to the same influences. And it'll be difficult then to break out of those old habits and those old patterns. Okay? And so likewise, if we don't change our environments, we're going to be subject to the same influences that have affected us and our lives. And again, maybe these are forces that are play that are going to keep us somehow locked into our old habits and routines or ways of thinking. And so if you find yourself going back to the same situation or the same abusive partner, or you can't figure out how to extract yourself from a toxic work environment or what have you, then you're almost certainly going to end up having to waste a great deal of your energy and perhaps years of your life coping with adversity and just trying to survive. But you don't want to just survive. Most of us as human beings want to be able to thrive and to be driven by our life's purpose, whatever that might be. Hence, the purpose of today's vlog then was to lay out and remind you of the productive ways and creative ways in which you can start to harness your energies and direct them towards your life purpose. And basically, I don't know if it's a very good acronym, but ICHS, multiple of ich in German, but ICHS, identify is the first step. Identify that which drains us of our energy. C, create an action plan that helps to refocus our energy and break the unhealthy cycles. The H is to habituate ourselves to the new routines to help us realize our plans and our aspirations for change. And then S, sustain. Sustain the changes by creating and recreating the necessary conditions for long-term success. Okay? So, identify, create, habituate, and sustain. ICHS. I hope this helps. And by the way, here's my challenge to you, my final challenge, taken from my usual sign-off. So give someone a hug today if that's not something that you routinely do. And I actually did that yesterday at the gym to 3 people, 3 total strangers, as I walked out, in a manner of speaking. I mean, I didn't actually go up and hug them with my sweaty and perhaps smelly body. But you know what I did do? Or I actually forced myself to do this. I actually had to psych myself up and think, okay, let's do this. But specifically, I walked past 3 total strangers who were working out, and they were in their own worlds. They all had headsets on, or headphones, or earbuds. And I looked at each person. I disturbed them in a way, but just for a moment. But I looked each person in the eye, and I extended my fist to give them a fist bump. And I said, great to each of them. basically the same thing. Great job. Wishing you health and happiness. Right? And what did every single one of them do back to me? Every single one of them smiled and gave me a fist bump. Right? So I gave away some of my energy, right, to these strangers with the idea of trying to, again, build them up, to give them some positive reinforcement. And who knows what benefits that might have generated? I don't know. Maybe that paid off in ways that I'll never know about. Maybe that person will have had a better day or been able to redirect their energies accordingly. Who knows, right? But my point is it definitely wasn't a waste, no matter what the long-term effects were, or even the short-term, because it aligned with my personal life mission. And so, again, may you do the same in your own way. And as ever, through those efforts and through pursuing your life's mission, may you continue to create peace in your lives and nurture love in your hearts. Till next time, Dr. J out. We'll see you soon.